workshop this evening concentrating on two matters. The first was really to come to you in relation to our asset management policy and talk about that, and basically, aside from the asset managed policy, some restructuring what we want to do around our strategic asset management documentation, and really just give you some insights into that ahead of bringing a slightly revised asset management policy formally to council for adoption. We just felt it was appropriate to have a conversation around that first. And the second one, just good evening, Councillor Shepherd, who's just joining us. The second one was really to talk about our PAMP. As part of our operational plan this year, we've got a project to undertake a review of the PAMP. And so we just really wanted to take this workshop and the opportunity to take you through where we're at in terms of that around process and what next steps might look around that, so that we can get some commentary from you in that regard about what we're proposing to do in that space, because the PAMP was originally created in finalised around 2016, and we just really want to review the future direction for that document, and keen to talk to you about that as well.
So Ashley, just for our hundreds of thousands of viewers out there, the PAMP in full terms is...
I was waiting for you to tell me, Todd.
The Pedestrian Access and Mobility Plan.
Yeah, Pedestrian and Mobility Plan. So, yeah, thanks, Todd, for doing that for those that might be watching online. It's essentially the strategic document for within council, which identifies and tries to prioritise where we might look an extension to what has traditionally been like a pedestrian network, but I think in this day and age now, we've certainly heard from our community, it's more around active transport. So it's pedestrian, cycling, even mobility scooters, all those mechanisms where people want to use an alternate method to their vehicle to get around, and what that looks like. So thank you for sharing that, Todd. So if councillors are happy, I might just kick off and share my screen. Just bear with me and I'll just make sure everyone can see that. Can everyone see that screen so that they've got the presentation ahead of them? Okay, thank you. So again, look, we'll kick off with the asset management policy. So just as I transfer to the next slide and just make sure everyone can see that so it's working okay at your end. Yep. So look, again, just for the benefit of some of our newer councillors, and forgive me if I'm sort of going over things that are relatively well understood, but when we talk about the integrated planning and reporting documentation, which is basically one of the foundational processes within council, it's something that informs our community strategic vision process. It influences our delivery program and our operational plan. That's essentially the framework that exists right across all of local government in New South Wales. And a key consideration in that process is also our asset management planning. As you'd understand, council's obviously the custodian of a large number of infrastructure related assets, and obviously we've got responsibilities about how we manage those on behalf of the community. So in that regard, we have our asset management planning framework, and probably one of the key documents in that we want to talk about in a little bit more detail this evening is around our asset management policy, which is again the key strategic document which outlines the guidelines for an implementation of a consistent asset management process throughout the Shire, as you can see there. So then following on from that, as part of the IPNR documentation, it also talks about a strategic asset management plan. And again, that's really seeking to respond to create some understanding around the community, around service levels, off the back of conversations that come from our community strategic plan, or in our instance, titled Our Plan for the Future. So again, off the back of that document, then we sort of get into asset category plans. So that's talking about how we might deal with roads, relative to bridges, relative to open spaces and the like. So there's different considerations that come into play. So again, the reason we're sort of just revisiting this conversation with you, council has always had our asset management policy, which has stood alone, but our strategic asset management plan and our asset category plans have been a bit of a hybrid model in the past. And so we've recently as part of this new term of council, been seeking to do a bit of a peer review of our asset management documentation. So looking at our policy, looking at our strategic asset management plan and what that might look like going forward. So that's probably a big part of our conversation. So off the back of all this, there's other matters that you can see there. We've got have software systems, registers and the like, integration with GIS, which is all about the workings that sit in the background, because ultimately with asset management, again, like you'd be very familiar with the Fixing Country Bridges program. So if we're building a bridge in 2025, we want to have an understanding of what the design life for that bridge is, and when we've got to look to start to schedule to replace components of it. So different components have a different life. You'll get less life out of your wearing surface than you will out of your superstructure, which is basically the bit that spans the river, versus a substructure, which is the part that holds the bridge up. So we want to plan for that and project into the future what those consequences are for those assets in our long-term financial plan. So that's really the purpose of the framework, I guess. So that's relatively well understood by everyone. So if I jump to that next slide and just let me know when you can see it, because there's a bit of a delay. Under the IPNR guidelines, which are current from September 2021, and again, you can see here a previous representation about how it feeds into our community strategic plan. So we've got our plan for the future here. And then as part of the IPNR process, you'll see over here in terms of resourcing strategy, there's some key elements. Our long-term financial plan, the councillors are very familiar with. Our workforce management plan, and that's basically making sure we've got the human resources largely to deliver what we say we're going to do. But then asset management planning is another key element of it. So as part of our IPNR process, every 4 years, it's about regular routine review of these systems, and that's really what we're going through at the moment to basically ultimately feed our delivery program, our operational plan, and then talk to our community about what we're delivering. Some essential elements that's in the IPNR guidelines are just listed there. So there's some key elements there. We should have an asset management strategy and plan, must be for a minimum time frame of 10 years. An asset management strategy must include an overarching endorsed asset management policy, which we've got, but which we've done a recent peer review of and looking to bring a new one back to council with some slight nuances. Then we should have an asset management strategy to identify assets that are critical to council's operations and outline our risk assets, strategies and the like. So in the past, our documentation in terms of our strategic asset management plan and our asset category plans have been merged into one document. And as a result, it's quite an involved process to update that with the routine cycle of council elections, to look at that every 4 years. And that's what we're looking to better structure on review of other systems within other councils. And then obviously the key thing here is obviously an asset management strategy must include specific actions required to improve council's asset management capability. So it's making sure that we're a good steward with what we've got, and obviously assess what our resourcing requirements and timeframes are, both in budget and personnel. And in the document here, there is a hyperlink there that you can hit, which can actually take you, once this is published, to the councillor portal. You can take time to go and have a look at the actual 2021 IPNR guidelines if that is of interest. So everyone happy for me to move on? So again, some of you would have seen this already, but I thought it might be beneficial for Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Shepherd who may not have seen it. So again, in terms of asset management maturity, we talk about our maturity in the Y scale and then our asset management elements on the X axis. So basically you can see here, level 1, we've got some high level policies and strategies, and you know where you want to be. Moving up through, okay, I know what I have, I know where my objectives, where I'm against my objectives, and then moving into a more mature situation about using asset lifecycle information for budgeting. Councillor King.
Actually, I suppose I just wanted to have a general question, and I'm thinking back onto what we just found at the sewage treatment plant at Urunga, and I think that was a bit over $500,000 surprise in some ways for us. It's not the first one. I know that in the past we had one of the bridges out at Briarfield that was getting attacked by a marine worm, and we didn't know that was, you know, that it was saline, the water. I know they had a similar issue with the boardwalk in terms of the pylons there. I'm just sort of wondering about how we get better at that, at looking at those assets. And we can say like it's underwater, but obviously that's got to come into it, that some assets are going to be hard to see. I'm wondering about so what I was also thinking about was the potential of AI to do some of this risk management stuff that's highlighting stuff to you before you actually, you know, that there is a person that goes, hey, we better check this or we better check that, because that to me, the sewage treatment works one was a pretty big one in terms of the cost. And I understand we're going to replace it now because that would have to go in, you know, sort of it would happen in the next 5 years or something anyway. But I'm just, is there plans in place to be looking at all of those assets and the impacts on those assets of wear and tear, and maybe even more so with the inclement weather or the weather systems we're getting as well? Or are we continuing to use the system that we've always used?
So thank you for the Councillor King for the question. So the reality is, if you just look at the slide here, generally speaking, we are largely around level 3. So I know where we are against my objectives. We've got some condition and information and the like, and we also know what we have. But the reality is we need to get better ourselves at then forecasting about using asset lifecycle information in my budgeting process. So that really goes to that point that you're making, Councillor King, about I've installed something, I'm really considering the design or the useful life for it. And then ahead of that, if all of a sudden that's got a 20-year horizon, then I'm not going to wait for 20 years to come upon me and then have a look at the issue and basically say, do I now need to do something? I'm going to step back from that, and maybe halfway through it, 10-year mark and the 15-year mark, I'm going to review my assumptions around that asset, and I'm going to undertake those inspections that are suitable to basically determine that I'm going to reach that 20-year life cycle, or if not, I can do some potential interventions to try and realise that, rather than wait for it to potentially creep up on us a little bit like it did at Urunga. So the reality is we've still got some maturing to go in that space. Part of that conversation is basically developing stronger systems around asset management, and there's been some discussions in my time about trying to create software solutions that support us through that. But I guess most recently, we have also seen the histories. We've had some discussions within council around developing disparate software systems, which maybe from a corporate perspective don't speak to each other as well as they could. So we're sort of giving consideration to that at the moment around the ERP system that we're looking to use to replace a lot of our digital systems on that next 5 or so year horizon. So I won't deny that we've got work still to do in that space. But these discussions are certainly helping us to become better prepared, and also to try and source the resourcing that we need to be better in this space. Councillor Allen.
Yeah, look, I think this was a really good question. And, there's other notable examples from the past, such as Newry Island Bridge, which failed and ended up, with a very less than satisfactory result as a result of that. But anyway, I guess my follow-on question to Dom's question is, will this review of this policy address this point? Will part of the outcome be to embed some better process?
The policy document itself basically sets the overarching guideline and the governance for it, and basically says council has got a commitment in this space. The reality is it's what sits below that in terms of more the strategic asset management plan and ultimately asset category plans is really where you make a real discernible difference in that space, and being better across the more specific detail of issues and risks that you might encounter, and to be more effective in this space. The policy certainly sets the framework, and it's something that really there's not dramatic changes in it from what's currently proposed. We've just used this opportunity to really do a peer review and maybe add a little bit more information into it to sort of strengthen an understanding largely about roles and responsibilities The previous policy talked about the general manager and councillors, and this has given a bit more weight and consideration to help all staff understand their role in that. And it's just a bit of a stronger position relative to what we viewed from our peers. But the next stage of this, and I'll speak to it in a future slide, will be this policy document really is just something just resetting for us and just maintaining that position. And it's the next steps around the strategic asset management plan and having a document which I think communicates better with the community around what that looks like at a higher level, but giving some consideration to different asset categories, risks and expenditure that's required. But then the real benefit will be in those asset category plans where we're looking at road conditions, bridge condition, water and sewer infrastructure, and understanding really where we need to make our investment and planning for it future. So going to Councillor King's point, we're anticipating the issue and we're planning for it. We're not realising it at the end of the project when we just think we're across the line and an unforeseen situation has surprised us and we've had to react to it.
Yeah, so it's at the next step, the SAMP and the critical asset plans that we're looking to embed those improvements. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
Thanks.
correct. Yep. Councillor Shepherd.
Surely we know what you say. Level 2 is I know what I have. So
Yep.
we know what our assets are. Surely we know where each of those assets stands on the depreciation schedule, don't we? So can't we ascertain, what needs to be inspected easily?
Yes, for some asset classes that can be reasonably well achieved for things that are quite visible, like for instance roads, bridges, playgrounds, open space assets. That's achievable. There are challenges, and I don't deny for a moment that we've got more exposure for a lot of our in-ground assets. Stormwater is an asset class that we're not particularly strong on, that often things have been developed and put in the ground back in the day where they weren't accurately captured. And we are now going through processes and trying to understand how we can capture that information, assess the remaining useful life when things have been installed, designed, and start to project what future expenditure may be required to support those systems. So there are challenges in asset classes like stormwater, and I guess there is also a degree of risk in around water and wastewater assets in relation to, again, large number of in-ground services and the nature of things like old AC mains, which over time can go soft and lead to failures. And again, we want to become more proactive about the planned replacement for those rather than waiting to be reactive and dealing with mains breaks and loss of service to the community. Councillor Shepherd.
So those sorts of assets that you've just described, are they not depreciated in any way, or they don't sit like if you've got a building or a car or whatever, it depreciates, doesn't it? And that's scheduled. Yep. So yep. They're not depreciated in the same way?
Oh, they are, I guess. But what I'm saying though in that space is we have less confidence around asset condition, largely with in-ground assets. So the challenge with in-ground assets is the expense, and this is true of basically all local government areas. If you were going to go and try and camera all of those networks to understand what the true condition was of every asset, that's extremely cost prohibitive. So you need to try and have a representative sample. So the way it's normally done is you have a sense of what your network might look like, and then you would generally pro-rata that against similar aged assets to start to do your projections around your replacement or your relining program. So we've certainly got doing some work at the moment, for instance, in the water and wastewater space. We're talking about what our future programs would look like in that space and trying to be more certain for councillors around future projects. But we do have some asset classes like stormwater that we've still got a body of work to do to be more mature and to be closer aligned to what we've got with above ground services such as roads and bridges and the like. So again, it's not all gloom and doom, but there's certainly, in terms of this maturity process, we're trying to transition from 2s and 3s towards 4s and then ultimately to 5s, but we've still got some time to go. I'll be honest in that space, but we're not Robinson Crusoe in that space. It's a big challenge for all of local government. We have lots of conversations about cost shifting and the like, and not trying to throw the state government under the bus, but our big challenge is really maintaining a very significant asset base, largely with the exception of water and wastewater, by using general revenue. Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So we probably help us better appreciate the challenge. How many of your team are involved in what you would categorise, and maybe it's even in part-time functions, in an asset management team?
Yeah, so for full disclosure, in this space at the moment, essentially you're dealing largely with Joshua and myself.
Yeah,
So
fair enough. Yeah.
historically, we have always had, and look, Josh may be able to comment prior to my time, we have within the structure at Bellingen Shire, we've always had an asset engineer at my time. We have struggled to maintain resourcing in that space probably over the last 18 months to 2 years. We've had people come and go, but it's been a challenging area to resource. And Josh and I are just about to go through a recruitment process again, trying to find someone to provide some capacity in that space. But again, that's one.
Actually, when you say you've had challenges to resource it, do you mean recruitment?
Yes, sorry, recruitment. Yeah,
it's not really a budgetary problem.
No, it's not a budgetary problem per se. It's literally trying to find a capable practitioner that basically wants to come and work with us. So it's not that there's not monetary capacity to do it. And again, I'm not trying to use this as an opportunity to beat the drum around finances either, but when you've got one asset engineer across largely a large variety of asset classes, you are spread somewhat thin. So I probably should also preface that we do have an asset inspector, which is largely also focused in the road space, that's been with us and is consistently working for us. And they're largely going around and regularly inspecting our network, photographing, taking video evidence of our road network. That informs a lot of things such as disaster-related claims and gives us asset condition for roads. But the asset engineer has been a resourcing challenge for us. Yep. So I don't know if that answers a question for you, Councillor O'Keefe, but it is a challenging space.
Very much so. Very much so. There's obviously a strong business case that if every now and then a business case for extra staff, not that you need that because you've got plans, but if we save every now and then a 500,000 spend, that's pretty easy break even, isn't it?
Yes, but I guess that this is honestly the challenge of the business that we're all involved with, led by yourselves, councillors, is basically we've got plenty of need for resource. We could certainly put people to work and make sure they're gainfully employed, but we are constrained in terms of the monies that are available for us to do that through general revenue and the like. That's just the challenge of local government. So councillors, happy if I move to the next slide? So again, and I appreciate there's a lot of words on here. As I've said before, councillors, just for your benefit, I try and write a slide deck always that if you have to come back and revisit it, it is somewhat self-explanatory. So please don't labour the point in trying to read it all. But, if you do choose to go back to it, should be reasonably straightforward. So basically, looking at that, we've done a review. We've always had an asset management policy, and we're proposing to bring that to probably the November council meeting for consideration to put back out on exhibition. Again, it's not dramatically different. It's just probably strengthening some elements such as the roles that all parts of council play in that space. So really that should be reasonably straightforward to address. But the big challenge for us is, as you can see there, the strategic asset management plan for us at the moment, that and our category information is really wedded into one document. So it's not really a document that's easy to communicate to the community and to councillors around our more key risks and our key approaches to mitigate those risks. So really what we'll be talking about there today is initially proposing to bring the asset management policy to council for consideration to place it on public exhibition, and then to go through that process, followed soon thereafter by the strategic asset management plan to try and make our processes more consistent with what we viewed across other local government areas, and then put us in a better place in that space so that we can have more effective and efficient reviews with each term of council under the IPR documentation. And then separate to that, we've got the category plans that we still need to invest more effort in for some asset classes and put us in a stronger position. So that's probably the difference, that we're going from a two-stage sort of documentation process to create that third stage to be more transparent, hopefully communicate more effectively with councillors and the community around that, and then ultimately allow us to be more effective, and we haven't got the challenge of keeping asset category plans, which goes into quite minute detail, and trying to keep that live and understood in terms of the strategic asset management plan, which gets reviewed with each cycle of council. So if you're happy for me to move on, so again, this is the crux. So next steps, the proposal is for the draft asset management policy to be reported to council and placed on public exhibition ahead of adoption. So that document is already largely in development. That's a screenshot of it over here. Basically, it won't be dramatically different, councillors. It's just basically aligning ourselves more consistently with the advice that we've seen from peer councils. But the second step will be a draft strategic asset management plan consistent with the elements of the IPNR framework, which will be finalised and brought to council for consideration and adoption. That's already in development somewhat. So that image down there is basically what that looks like, and we're trying to make that a more appropriate public-facing document than what the current one is. So it's a little bit more easily understood and digested and transparent with our community around what we're doing in that space. So really, that's everything that I really wanted to speak to you about today. It was really just a courtesy heads up before the policy comes to council. There won't be dramatic wholesale changes from the existing policy, but we just felt it's appropriate to give you some advice about where we're going in this space before we bring a report to council. So on that note, are there any questions that people may have off what we've been speaking about today?